Power on.
Real-time Sovryn is go.
What is going on with Mozilla Firefox? And Dr. Sovryn, will you please get on the air? Tell us what it all means. Well, you're in luck because I am here to tell you what it all means. And I 10,000% guarantee you, no one is giving you this angle on the situation. It's been a hell of a week for web browsers in general, partly because pretty much out of nowhere, I mean, we knew in 2025 it was going to happen, but Google announced that they finally, or they didn't just announce, they announced it earlier that it was going to happen, kept getting delayed, but they finally came out and said, yep, we're implementing Manifest v3. Your full-on version of uBlock Origin is done for. Unless, you're doing some developer options in the background or something. But they really kind of came out of nowhere. I think most people were assuming it was going to happen later in 2025. And, you would think that this would be, like such a moment of boon for Firefox, because Firefox is supporting Manifest v2 and Manifest v3. If you don't understand what I'm talking about here. So there are, for ad blockers, which I consider to be an absolute necessity for using the internet. Okay, ad blockers required some very specific abilities that kind of the previous underlying code of Chromium, okay, not just Chrome. We'll get into a little bit more of this, but this isn't even what we're really here to talk about. With Manifest v2, ad blockers were able to function at a much higher level. Okay, I'm trying to keep this pretty simple. With Manifest v3, a lot of that special functionality has basically disappeared. Okay, now I don't need to get into conspiracy territory around, I mean, look, Google makes money off of ads. So, why would they want to continue to empower ad blockers? Of course they would not. It's why they've never officially allowed them, minus being built into certain web browsers. They've never officially allowed them on Android, as compared to, say, where on iOS you can run system-wide ad blockers. Why? Because Apple doesn't require, I'm not saying they don't, but Apple doesn't require, money from ads. Okay. Anyway, pretty much every Chromium-based web browser, which is almost every one, and actually I was surprised to learn this I didn't know beforehand, that even Safari, which does not use the Blink engine, which is, what Chromium-based browsers are based on, I didn't realize that they were going to actually implement Manifest v3 in WebKit, and they are. So now Safari has had as I understand it, has had a interesting relationship with ad blockers. But regardless, the way macOS is set up, like you can use some of the more popular web enhancing, which is really what we should just call it, ad blockers, because they do make the internet barely tolerable as compared to not tolerable at all. There's some apps that can be run a little more system-wide, shall we say, within macOS itself as well. So, it's never been a huge deal for Safari. And even then, like them switching to Manifest v3, I don't think is, well, it doesn't change that much about Safari itself. Okay. But the only major web browser that did not switch to Manifest v3 is, of course, the one that runs on a completely separate engine, like Safari, and that being Mozilla's Firefox. Okay? Again, this all happened within the past few days. I'm recording this on March 5th, 2025. And Firefox, basically what they did is because you have to understand that Firefox, even though it runs on a separate, web rendering engine, in this case, was it Quantum, Gecko, whatever they want to call it now. Even though they run a separate web rendering engine, a few years ago, if you recall, the Mozilla switched to where their add-ons, as compared to extensions, they're called add-ons on Firefox. They're called extensions everywhere, on other browsers. Okay, they switched to where their add-ons ran in a Chromium compatibility layer. So this way, more developers could easily port their extensions to become add-ons for Firefox. If this is confusing to you, I apologize. No, I don't apologize. All these fucking engineers need to apologize. Whatever. Okay, we're going to have some sympathy for the devil here, because the amount, to cut to the chase on some of it, the amount of people who are coming out now on YouTube and wherever else that these commentators think that their opinion matters, the amount of people that are coming out saying stop using Firefox now over what happened with their privacy policy is insane. And I'm going to come in, with, again, a little sympathy for the devil on all this. But let's keep going. So Firefox had decided, when Manifest v3 was proposed, okay, they had decided that, all right, what we're going to do is we're going to do a superset, basically, of Manifest v3 and Manifest v2, where either can run. Like, whatever your add-on needs or is used to functioning with will run. And so uBlock Origin, far and away the most popular ad blocker extension add-on out there. And I would agree, the best. I've been recommending it forever, on Sovryn-tech. Really only runs at full force on Firefox now. Okay, or a Firefox derivative, and we'll certainly talk about those, because I can't believe they're being recommended, but we'll get there, okay? So, if you want like a full, what I guess we could call full fat ad blocking experience, you basically have to run Firefox now. Okay, now running Firefox, and that's on desktop, regardless of what OS you're using. Okay, running Firefox on Android, in my opinion, was always a no-brainer, because it used different security certificates for many years. I think that may have changed actually recently. This is all stuff that I've had to update for my Dark Android, the latest edition of the Dark Android book. But also, it allowed you to run natively uBlock Origin on an Android device. I mean, that's just a no fucking brainer to use that. And it's the only one. I mean, other web browsers, Opera, Edge, Brave, of course, they all have ad blockers added or baked into the download to the browser itself. But with Firefox, you actually had the option to use not all add-ons, but a lot of add-ons. They had to go through a very specific process to be functional on Android, for Firefox for Android. But it was overall great implementation. It works. Okay. So we got that out of the way. Now you can, for the sake of completeness, you can still use Brave, because Brave has an ad blocker baked into the web browser. Okay, regardless of what device you're using it on. And so they weren't concerned about Manifest v3 because they're what they call shields. Their shields system was already providing that functionality at the browser level, regardless of extensions. Okay, so Brave is an option where you can still get a full fat, ad block experience and much more with shields. And really, let's be clear, uBlock Origin does a lot more than just block ads, but I mean, it is essential security for web browsing, in my opinion. Opera said, and I am not sure how far they've come along on this, because again, the implementation of Manifest v3 kind of came out of nowhere. Okay, like the final. I mean, we knew it was coming. It just dropped on us, by Google last week. So Opera had claimed previously that they were going to modify Opera's code to where Manifest v2 extensions could still work. So theoretically, uBlock Origin may still work full fat on Opera, but maybe not. We'll see. I have yet to see how that's been implemented. But by and large, for the simplest and most comprehensive experience of ad blocking, I mean, Firefox really is still the way to go. Okay. Now, that was really all just a sidebar. Okay. I'm going to end this conversation off with, what is my recommendation for a web browser? But we have to talk about a whole other situation that in some ways has everything to do with what I just talked about, but at the same time, nothing to do with it, because it has, well, I can't say it has nothing to do with code, but people are concerned that it has something to do with code. Anyway, so the moment that this happened, that Google implemented Manifest v3, should have been, with the right marketing campaign, should have been a massive boon for Firefox. Like, millions of people should have switched to Firefox that day. Basically saying, holy shit, no, I want a proper ad blocker on my browser. I'm switching to Firefox after this, because no Chromium-based browser, except for maybe Opera and Brave, is going to give me the experience that I want. That did not happen. What ended up happening, and boy, if I'm going to be conspiratorial about something, it would be this. What did end up happening is Firefox, in their infinite wisdom, I hope you hear the sarcasm, decided to change their privacy policy that day, or around that day, to where they removed language that made a guarantee to Firefox users that their data that is collected by Mozilla through the use of Firefox would not be sold to third parties. So instead of everybody switching to Firefox, you suddenly had, like I said earlier, you had a bunch of commentators and less knowledgeable people saying, get off of Firefox. And we're talking about people like, there's YouTube channels, have some odd 3 million views that did 15-minute videos about this, saying, oh, get the hell off of Firefox. I can't believe this. This is deplorable. They don't care about your privacy, blah, blah, blah. Of course, I mean, not to get into whataboutism, but in all seriousness, my first response was, well, wait, what browser does give a shit about your privacy? And I mean, really, and a browser that you could actually access, say, your bank with, because I would assume the reason, and rightfully so, the reason you're concerned about your privacy is that, shit that you're buying or, you logging into your bank and all this other stuff is information that you want anonymized, protected, private, whatever. But you're not going to log into your bank from a Tor browser. You're not. Shut up. Do it. Try it. Don't turn anything off. Be on Tor. It's not going to fucking work. I love the Tor browser. I love the Tails operating system. I use it almost every day. But I also know what it's good for and what it's not. And so beyond that, you tell me who the fucking company is that actually does give a shit about your privacy. In a way that Firefox and Mozilla in particular, in my opinion, actually has cared about that. Now, yeah, I mean, keep thinking. So even when I heard this before, look, Firefox has already responded to these accusations, or has responded to this situation, I should say. It's not accusations. It's true. They removed that language. There's no debate about that. You can look at screenshots, between the two, and you can see where, wow, that seemingly privacy respecting language, or this idea that they're not going to sell your data, has been removed. So, there's no bullshit. That occurred. Now, when I heard about this, my first thought was surrounding the privacy law, the privacy legislation that has initially, at least in the United States, been implemented in California, and is slowly seeming to get implemented in other states in the U.S. as well. Because these new laws are really very, very murky in what language you can use. And, and look, I'm an anarchist, so I don't agree with any law and I want no laws implemented. But the ideology perhaps behind some of these laws, that are starting to get implemented that, really change the entire landscape of how companies that operate online can converse, what words they can use. We're not even getting into a conversation around the control of language, but you think, for example, like, with digital goods. So companies that operate in California, they have to change the language on buttons, say like Steam. They can't say they can't use the buy word for a game. They have to use like purchase or something that implies that, well, it's not really yours. You're more just buying a license for it. It can be taken away or it can be taken down from our store at any time. So you don't really own it. And that's what the law was addressing. And I mean, the point is a solid one. I just don't think a law is the way to solve it, nor do I think a language change is necessarily the way to solve it, but regardless, okay? But this is the kind of thing, and this is exactly actually how Firefox, how Mozilla, I should say, responded to what they did with the privacy policy for Firefox. Here it is. They came right out and said, Mozilla, quote, Mozilla doesn't sell data about you in the way that most people think about selling data, and we don't buy data about you. We changed our language and that's in the privacy policy. We changed our language because some jurisdictions, stallion breaking in, read states. Some jurisdictions define quote unquote sell more broadly than most people would usually understand that word. Firefox has built-in privacy and security features plus options that let you fine-tune your data settings, end quote. And they also, right there, they hit at what was part of the solution with this. Look, for the most part, you can very much control what data that Mozilla could even have about you within Firefox. No, really, you could. Also, Firefox, minus a couple of DRM style applications that you can turn off in the settings, and they're in big, bold checkboxes and everything, so that to turn them off. You can modify Firefox endlessly, for fuck's sake. But, minus these certain DRM things, this is all open source stuff. And in fact, the aforementioned Tor browser is based off of entirely, or almost entirely, the code for Firefox. And even the recommendations that people have made after they freaked out about, the change in language in Mozilla or in Firefox's privacy policy, okay, they were all, a lot of them were recommending forks of Firefox that still use updates from Firefox to this very day. Now, the reason they're able to do that is because the shit's all open source. And people can check the code. If the code is doing something nasty, it'll happen. Like, the amount of people, not just the Tor project, the amount of people that are constantly checking out Firefox's code. Now, I mean, there's also plenty of people who are constantly checking out Chromium-based browsers and their code. Granted, they can't look into the 10 to 5% that Google keeps closed source. So who the hell knows what Google's collecting? With Firefox, that's not so much the case. And if there's an area that is closed source, again, you can turn that off. And Mozilla does the kindness of making those places where you can turn this stuff off, making them very blatant in the settings. Should they do it during setup? Yes. Yeah. I mean, but also they don't automatically turn Pocket on. That's one of the more concerning, or one of the first concerning issues, was that Mozilla is, baking in Pocket, which is DRM, closer, whatever. Okay. You can see how convoluted this all is. And that's why when people come out with this recommendation, holy shit, don't use Firefox. Well, slow your roll. Slow your roll hard. That conversation needs a whole hell of a lot more nuance. And not only that, it requires even more than an understanding of history and code. It requires an understanding, honestly, of the human condition. And that's a point I'm going to get into in a minute. But let's keep rocking, okay? So, Firefox comes out and basically says, look, what you think the word sell means, the government does not see it the same way you do. And they're not wrong about this. Look the shit up. They're not making up crap. They're not backpedaling. They know exactly what they're saying, and they're not wrong. And look, I have plenty of my own problems with the Mozilla Foundation, especially honestly, ever since 2020. Okay, and we all know what that means. I have my own problems with them. This is not one of them. I totally understand where they're coming from, and the instant it happened, I was like, oh, shit. Yep, they've got to change this because just the way that terms are being reorganized due to privacy legislation, they don't have a choice. I knew that instantly. I didn't need a rebuttal from Mozilla. I don't know how because some of these other people, some of these other commentators on YouTube and wherever else, there's some smart people out there. And they didn't realize this? They didn't think of this first? So, anyway, that's really what was going on there. It's just that's language they cannot legally use anymore. Even though, arguably, the philosophy is still there. But even then, the philosophy doesn't even exactly matter because the code lets you control this shit in the first place. So who gives a shit even what Mozilla thinks on that end? Yes, I like to follow the attitude of companies, and I get worried when they get partisan. Okay, everything's political. We could make that kind of argument depending upon how do you want to define political, how do you define cell, how do you define data, Okay, but for all intents and purposes, I get worried when people get partisan for sure. Okay, this is the same reason, and I've heard plenty of privacy experts, security researchers, journalists, go down the list, who were, one of the reasons they were so bullish on, say, Signal was because an anarchist was in charge. Now, that doesn't guarantee anything because then we had the mobile coin fuck up. But regardless, or fiasco, I should say, regardless, okay, yeah, you feel better when somebody who isn't going to play any side, who isn't going to take any government side, is in control of something such a key piece of kit, such a key piece of software, like, say, an instant messenger. Now, so this gets me to the point, what's the response to this? The response to this is not, do not use Firefox. That's not the proper response to this. You can have plenty of reasons to not use Firefox. This is not one of those. Okay. We need to lay down some fundamentals here real quick. Okay. I would argue that the three most important pieces of software, okay, that you can use. One, the first, is the operating system. Now, we could go a little bit more low level than that, all right, and talk about what's the firmware running on your, within your processor architecture? Okay, do you have Intel ME on there? Ooh, if you do you really have a private computer? No, but regardless, okay. So you have, but let's not. We'll probably talk about that a little bit in a minute. Okay, but let's not go there right now. Let's keep this simple. The three most important: operating system. Why? It's the base layer, obviously. Okay. Not talking about, again, firmware at like 0. 2 would be your web browser. Why? Because that's usually how you get all your software. I mean, unless you're using a Microsoft Store or Flatpak or, something along those lines, regardless, it's how you not only get software, but how you engage with much of the world. Most people also handle their email through their web browser and all this. For some people, a computer is nothing without a web browser. Now, does that ideology or does that philosophy blow my mind? Or way of thinking blow my mind? Yeah, I don't understand. But okay, whatever. I'm from a different time, I guess. Okay, moving on. So, operating system, web browser. Right after that, in my opinion, would probably be your password manager. That's a very serious conversation to have. And we've started having it over the past year. I mean, we've had it a billion times over the past decade. But a 2024, 2025 version is something that we've been having recently. But those are the three most important pieces of software. If you want to go with number 4, okay, fine. And, your instant messenger or whatever, I guess, could be, considered within that. And that's not an unfair thing to consider as well. And in fact, maybe we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So those 3 or 4 things you do not want to get wrong. You do not. You can't afford to get those wrong because they are the base level. If security breaks at any of those points, your security is broken almost entirely, depending upon which one. So again, this is something you can't get wrong. So in that sense, I empathize with people who are like, holy shit, Firefox is selling my data. Now, apparently, which isn't true, or as far as we know, isn't true. But regardless, I understand why they feel so passionate about it, because deep down whether consciously or unconsciously, they understand just how fucking key a web browser is to your, security in digital life. So I get it. I understand why people are so passionate about this. All right. But again, these are things you can't get wrong. With that in mind, I have made the argument many, 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 many times over the years that I am depending upon what kind of software we're talking about. Now, we know what kind of software we're talking about here. We're talking about core stuff, right? Operating system, web browser, instant, or, messaging app, and password manager. We're talking about really, really core stuff. I have always been skittish about these kinds of things being run by small teams, because you fuck it up and you potentially lose everything. Like, everything is on the line. And to just have that kind of operation run by 1, 5, 10, 20 people terrifies me. Absolutely terrifies me. Even if the shit's open source. Because, yeah, okay, great. We can look at the code. But how many people are looking at the code? Like, someone's got to do that in the first place. And depending upon the complexity of what we're talking about here, and holy shit, is there anything more complex than operating systems or web browsers? There's a reason everything is based off of Chromium or based off of Firefox, generally, minus, WebKit or, like Qt browsers and whatever else. I mean, I know there's a lot of little ones out there that do different shit, or Pale Moon still running off of old versions of Gecko, whatever, okay? There's a reason, because like today, and we have the research to back this up today. It's practically impossible to make a web browser from the ground up now, because the complexity of interconnectivity on the internet and all the different protocols that you use, okay, and all the different code and everything else is so high. I mean, it would take years, probably more. I mean, that's why, look, Opera used to have what? The Presto engine, right? No, they've been Chromium forever now. What's Vivaldi? Well, based on Chromium. Again, because it's the only economically viable thing to do. This shit is too hard, too complex. You got to run with what's been going for a good while. Even Microsoft, for fuck's sake, threw in the towel. Right? They got rid of Trident and Edge. If Microsoft can't do it, holy shit. Not that I'm praising Microsoft for anything, but you get my point. So I always sweat when we're talking about software that is this important. I always sweat when it's being done by a small team or by a single individual, for that matter. And hey, I know there are some real, you think like OpenSSL, you think all kinds of like really key technologies for the internet, that some of them are run by people who are seemingly barely making minimum wage. And it's like a 2-person team. We know the scary stories around that. And even Silicon Valley at large has responded to that by saying, we got to donate a few million to these people, these individuals who are, basically updating the code for some of the core aspects of the internet. Because if these people aren't taken care of, it leads to disaster. They're human. They're hungry. They need love. So these small teams always scare me, and this is not a new point for me. I've brought this up many, many times, okay? We can go back to 2016, February. In fact, that many years, almost to the day. Okay, we can go back to February 2016 with Linux Mint, where there were malicious ISOs of the entire operating system that were downloaded. Now, the team was able to respond fairly quickly. The crackers, okay, the malicious actors, were able to get into the back, through WordPress to upload the malicious ISO versions of the entire Linux Mint operating system. But people downloaded that. And I mean, again, the team responded as quickly as a small team could. Okay. But at the same time, I personally feel like, holy shit, this is what happens when you have an incredibly small team, and one that can't go round the clock to keep an eye on this sort of thing, handling something as important as the computer's fucking operating system. And I've more or less, as popular as Mint has ever become, I've more or less never really recommended it. Not when it's mission critical, baby. If you need a Linux desktop that you want to game on, and I mean, there's whole other options as far as that goes these days. That's a different story. Okay. But if you're talking like your main machine and whatever else, I mean, I know Linux Mint is based on Ubuntu, and boy, don't even get me started on the problems Ubuntu has had as late. But regardless, okay, this is what happens when you have a small team. I don't think security can get done right. Now, there's a middle ground where you can go too big and then you can never really secure it. Think Sony Pictures. Okay, granted, that's not necessarily a software company, not anymore anyway. But, there's a middle ground to find within that for sure. But a small team is not the way to be. Not with an operating system, not with a web browser, not with a messaging app, not with a password manager either, for that matter. These are things you absolutely, you can't fuck them up. So, Linux Mint is, again, one example, but there have been many others over the years, and this gets to the main point that I want to bring up here. Okay. I don't think Mozilla did anything wrong here. All right. And certainly nothing that should, if this is not the thing to justify you saying, oh, fuck, I can't use, Firefox anymore. This is just not that thing. There may be other things, and you may be justified in that, but this is not it. Okay. But I want to go a little bit further, because here's what some people were recommending. And some people that I respect was Louis Roseman was saying, hey, if you want to, not have to worry about what happens at Mozilla, use LibreWolf. And look, I respect the guy, and I think he's he's getting great messaging out there. Okay. Way bigger than I am too. All right. But I'm just bigger. I mean, like his YouTube channel is. I don't know. We can go to the gym together and decide the other thing, but that's for some fun sportsmen. But to recommend LibreWolf, and other people were recommending, it wasn't just him. Other people were recommending switching to LibreWolf. To do that, no. Because this is one of those situations where, no, it's that small team. And that small team, it doesn't even have to be like Linux Mint where it's a security issue necessarily, right? For example, again, we're making this recommendation. We're talking about your web browser, your gateway to the fucking internet, to your entire digital life, which in 2025, and for many years now, directly has impact, massive impact. In some ways is even more important today than your meat space life. And you're going to rely on a small team for that? Fuck no. For example, let's talk about, I mentioned earlier, what do you do at the, at the firmware level, right? Let's go back to 2016 again. Okay. And then even into 2017 when this was starting to get resolved. In fact, I think this incident has largely been trying to get scrubbed seemingly from the internet, because I talked about it on Sovryn Tech back then. But in fact, some of the links I had were dead. I had to go to archive.org to get some of this, but regardless. So there was a situation where in 2016, where LibreBoot, okay, which is a core boot alternative for, basically the firmware for, for your BIOS and for your computer to boot up in. Now, this is a very valid thing. You think of computers I've recommended forever, like the Privacy Beast and some others, where they allow for, they may have put, at the time, they put LibreBoot or, whatever flavor core boot that they wanted to put on there. so that you were securing your computer right from boot up, not even getting to the operating system yet, but preventing all kinds of potential. I mean, again, the Intel management engine, Intel ME, like that's malware just sitting on your machine that you can't really do anything about. And yes, AMD has the same thing. And I imagine every processor out there has it. And that's getting into a whole other situation because, there was that time where, if you remember, Dell, of all things, kind of messed up on their site, and people were able to see that Dell was offering, and clearly it was to government contractors, they were offering laptops that didn't have the Intel management engine built into them. Why? Well, because the government fucking knows that that's spyware. So, and again, it's spyware. It's like at the lowest level. All right. So buying a computer that has, some flavor of core boot, open flavor of core boot, like LibreBoot or something, is a great and wonderful thing. Right. And that's not even talking about Cubes OS. And, there's all kinds of directions we could go with that. But what happened, and this bothered me to no end, because I was recommending LibreBoot based computers for years at that point in 2016 on my show, tens of thousands of listeners. And what ended up happening was the lead project manager for LibreBoot, which at the time was under the purview of the GNU project under the Free Software Foundation. Okay. Leah Rowe, I think was her name. She basically, accused the Free Software Foundation of transphobic behavior, that they fired somebody who was trans, and they fired them, that the Free Software Foundation had fired them because they were trans. And because of that, she pulled LibreBoot from the GNU project. Okay. Now, a person acting on their principles and all this stuff, can we respect that if you want to respect that? And depending upon your, partisanship, whatever, or your thoughts, your ideologies, okay, whatever, we could say, sure, we could respect that. Okay. Was it like a death knell for LibreBoot to pull itself away from the GNU project? No, not really. Okay. We talked about this back at the time, on an episode, but the more concerning thing was when you find out that Leah Rowe basically had, I'll put links in the show notes so you people can, all of you can read more about this if you really want to deep dive. Okay. But it was discovered that Leah Rowe basically had complete control of the servers. Here, I'm going to read. Again, this has to come from archive.org. Let me make sure I get the right story up here. So, quote, let's see. We, the contributors, are not consulted about, this is coming from members of the LibreBoot team. We, the contributors, are not consulted about any of the views expressed on the LibreBoot.org website when they are hastily published by, Leah wrote Damien Zammit, then a contributor to the project. So whenever you read, quote, we believe, end quote, or quote, we say that, end quote, on the lists and websites, Leah has ultimate control of the LibreBoot project currently. And it goes on, quote, previously, the LibreBoot repository and the website could only be modified by the project leader, Leah Rowe. This setup created a single point of failure with little leeway for dissenting contributors. Since then, I've joined the project as a sysadmin, along with another contributor. Direct access to the code and servers is shared. Though the project cannot yet be completely decentralized, this change is a win for transparency. Previously, most of LibreBoot.org, including public statements such as those regarding GNU, were issued by Leah herself. The rest of the team and the community were not consulted. But it goes on, and basically saying that, I mean, look, LibreBoot's open source. Okay, great. And so again, people can check it, but are you still checking it? But this is the bottom line, is that somebody got personally offended, rightly or wrongly, got personally offended, and was effectively able to completely control this incredibly important project, especially one that I was recommending people buy computers that have that built into. Okay. Like, I mean, can you see the disaster here? This is the thing. Behind all of this code, behind all of these, implementations in software, whatever we're talking about, operating system, web browser, password manager, messaging service, you take your pick. Okay. Behind all of these, this are human beings. Human beings are inherently regardless of what Silicon Valley may think, human beings are inherently passionate. And we act on our passions. Somebody has a bad day on one of these small teams, and shit can go wrong real fast. This is why you want a larger team with basically a system of checks and balances. There's no guarantee that larger teams will keep things from fucking up. Just look at CrowdStrike, okay? Or take your, shit Microsoft has even done. There's no guarantee of that. But in those instances, usually they're just mistakes, as to where on a smaller team, they can be actions of absolute maliciousness. Speaking of like 2020, what about the epic Twitter hack that everybody seems to forget that I think was far more devastating than anything else? I mean, because you had, I think it was, if I recall, it was, kind of confirmed that there was a bit of an inside job being done there with God mode that allowed somebody to, impersonate Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos' account, go down the list. I mean, it was bad. So being a larger company is no guarantee, but it's at least a bit safer when you have more hands that this stuff has to go through. And updates should be slow. Like, I don't have a problem with large teams and it slowing things down. No, yeah, it should be slow. Because, the move fast and break things mentality, I mean, we know where that's got us as far as programming goes. Like, the concept of extreme programming, fuck that shit. Yeah, I want critical updates fast, sure, and those generally will go through faster, but otherwise, take it slow, man. But this is my problem, is, and I mean, there's other people like, oh, Lieber Wolf is woke and whatever. Yeah, okay, all right. Like, I get it. Okay, if you feel that way, look, again, but understand this, if that's how you feel about it, understand this, behind all of these projects are passionate human beings, even if they don't seem like it on the outside or whatever. On the inside, it's what we are. We feel, we want love, we get hurt, all of these things. And when it's a really small team, again, all it takes is one bad day and one person who has way too much control, say for in the example of Lieberboot with Leia Rowe, and bad things can happen. I'm not saying that they did in that case, but they could have. It could have been really bad. And so to recommend to switch over to some small team stuff, I'm not knocking small teams, okay? And look, people, I think, for example, talk about a small team, Graphene OS, which, boy, there's a reason I don't run that. Okay. But I think about small teams. Now, Graphene OS, that development team actually contributes upstream to the security of Android overall. Like they contribute to the code. And Google's, who ultimately control the Android dev team, will implement some of those things. Fucking great. That's awesome. And I hope you get compensated in some way. And I mean that. But, am I going to trust, my security and privacy to a very small team that, again, who knows what system of checks and balances they have in place? That, again, someone could just have a really bad day or just nuke their project or whatever. And then where am I left? And whatever, yes, it's all open source. So somebody can just pick up the torch and run with it and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But you can't, this is the thing people don't get. You can't have that. You cannot have downtime. You just can't. Not in our present interconnected ecosystem. You just cannot. You can't. You cannot have downtime. So, to recommend, again, these side projects for something like, say, an operating system or a web browser or even a password manager, or a messaging service or whatever. No. And I mean, look, again, I'm not knocking these small teams. I think some really cool shit's being done. What is it? The Delta app, messaging app. Amazing. I mean, it's basically, it's a encrypted messaging app that can work with like anybody's email address. Like really, really cool. But, am I going to rely on Delta Chat for my mission critical stuff? No. And I mean, we could go down the list on these things. Now, don't think I'm contradicting myself, because I'm telling you that, okay, because there are some, shall we say, software classes, okay, where, yeah, a small team is fine, right? Like Gorehill, I'm not sure how many people are behind uBlock Origin that we've been talking about, but Satan bless them, they're amazing. And if it's just Raymond Hill, that's incredible and great, okay? But that's an add-on. He's not the only person behind the entire web browser. Probably be pretty epic if he was, because I like how rigid he is, but for how software should be and how the internet should work. But regardless, like there's software where, okay, a small team works and makes sense. That's fine, because they're not, say, worried about encryption, or they're not worried about this. But when we're talking about things as important as the operating system and the web browser, or like I say, even the password manager, no, small team's not it. There was a point I was going to develop. My plan was, because like LastPass was screwing up and everything, I was going to write, I was going to make a password manager. This was going to be my software contribution to the world. Okay. I was going to write it in Go, and I was going to call it Kenny Logins. You get it? I know. I kill myself, but I'm serious. That's what I was going to call it. I was going to call it Kenny Logins, because it's your logins, and Kenny Loggins, one of my favorite artists. Take it to the danger zone, baby. Anyway, okay. So I was going to do that, but then like I very quickly came to this very realization that I'm sharing with you, is that is too important a piece of software to rely on one person, even if I was basing it off of, say, other open source code. It's too important, and I couldn't respond fast enough. Okay. So it was my responsibility to not develop that stuff. I mean, it could have been like a fun little side project, but holy shit, if I ever found out, I mean, and we've had where even, password managers with large development teams, say like through the icons, whatever, if I found out that somebody, something terrible happened to somebody because, there was an exploit against them that breached their password manager, and it was the password manager that I created and wrote. I'd have a hard time living with that. Like that'd shatter me. So I'm not going to take that on. Okay. Because I know what I could contribute. I know how much time I could put into it, and I know that it wouldn't be enough. Even if I open sourced it and people could like volunteer or whatever, like I would still feel, it'd still feel like my baby, and I would still feel very responsible around it. So again, and look, the whole LibreWolf thing, like, yeah, if you have, I mean, it becomes a question of like, okay, what are you doing online? Right? Like, because like I said earlier, the Tor browser, amazing. I use it all the time for very specific things, but that's just it. Okay. These people who are coming out screaming about Firefox are basically saying, no, you need to switch your primary web browser, which I disagree with. Okay. You need to switch your primary web browser. No. Or the no is, and you need to switch it to this little team's open source project or something. No. If there are specific use cases where a more security, privacy focused, something deeper, like maybe a LibreWolf or whatever, okay, which again is really just Firefox. I mean, yes, there's important, changes made. I get that. But if you need that, okay, then use that for that little thing you need to do. But otherwise, I 10,000% recommend that you use something that has an entire company behind it. And look, as other commentators have brought up, I mean, Mozilla is making money, believe it or not. Yeah, a lot of it may come from Google, but overall, they're making money, even just from like the investments that they've made. So, yeah, telling people to go off again to these little side projects. No, absolutely not. There's a reason that the fucking, Linux Foundation basically recommends to everybody, and most Linux distros do this. What is the base web browser? It's Firefox. Even the KDE team switched to Firefox. Generally, it used to be Conqueror forever, but they know, this is how important a web browser is. You do not go recommending things unless somebody's really that damn good. Okay, you do not go recommending these things. And I mean, the user is that damn good to where they know exactly what they're doing, and they've got, they're running Wireshark and whatever else, and they're monitoring their network traffic really hard and blah, 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 blah. Okay, you know who you are, and if you're at that level, you're probably running IceCat or some other shit anyway, and good for you. Okay, but I hope you get my point. That when it comes to your main web browser that you log into your bank with, that maybe you engage on social media with, and share nudes or something, whatever the fuck you do, I don't know. Okay. And I'm not judging on any of that you know me, I'm not. Okay. But you use something that has a goddamn company behind it. Do I like corporations? No. Do I even like capitalism? No. All right. But at the same time, the world we live in, and I'm not making necessarily a pragmatic argument, even though you might think that I am, but the world we live in and the things that most people need to do on their, smartphone or on their computer or whatever. Okay. You want what you're using to be something that has gone through a lot of hands, a lot of different teams. Okay. And if you're really that concerned about privacy at the level that apparently people who are suddenly saying, holy shit, don't use Firefox anymore, then I assume you're generally only buying things in Bitcoin or with cash. You don't even have a bank. You're rocking the Tor browser, whatever. But I kind of have a hard time believing that somebody who lives that way has 3 million followers on YouTube or 3 million subscribers. I really do. There's not 3 million people out there that give that much of a shit. Because what do people want? It's the same reason why I'm saying, don't inherently trust the small teams, regardless of what their ideologies are. Okay. Because, people just, they want to, I know this might sound cliche, but I'm not kidding. People they want to be loved. Okay. They want to make some money. They want to feel some sense of security and all this stuff. And look, if you think LibreWolf is going to give them that, I mean, do you really? No, that's not what they're thinking about. They're not thinking about their privacy in that regard. Why did people use Facebook forever? Because it was a novel way to potentially sleep with their neighbor. We knew how Facebook was fucking with people's heads. We know the privacy nightmare that it is. We know the human nightmare that it is. People kept using it. People still keep using it. And I guess now you have grandmothers trying to get with other people and whatever. Hey, again, no judges here. But ask yourself, what do you want to do with your computer? What do you want to do with your smartphone in the first place? Okay? And it's a pretty good bet, unless you're trying to buy drugs, and even that in a lot of states is becoming, decriminalized or something along those lines, where it's lightened up on legislation anyway. Okay? I guess then you need to think about it, but then really, were you seriously just logging into Firefox to buy your drugs? Who told you to do that? So, this whole conversation just baffles me. It really baffles me. It's just as easy to say that, minus maybe Tor or something, it's just as easy to say that, look, no, going online eliminates the very, very possibility of privacy. You're worried that Mozilla is selling off your data? What the fuck do you think every website you go to is doing? people just want to be outraged about something. People just, maybe it's because they're interacting so much with machines and AI and whatever else that they stop feeling anything inside. And so they're just looking for ways of, okay, what's something I can get mad about? Because that's the only feeling I've got left. It's what it seems like. So, we've been meandering. We've been kind of all over the place with this, but let's wrap it up. And I said that I would wrap it up with, okay, what do I recommend using right now? All right, look. Yes, privacy is incredibly important to me. Privacy is incredibly important. How do you achieve actual privacy? That is far more complicated than your choice in web browser. Far more complicated. And your web browser is far from enough to even begin that conversation. That conversation, honestly, starts way back into where we would be talking about core boot, Libre boot, so on. Regardless, okay, you do what you can, and you want options, okay? So if you want options, as in the most control over your web browser, yeah, honestly, Firefox is still the top choice. I mean, you could look at something, and this falls on this teeters on the edge of maybe that kind of smaller team, but it's something that actually gets funding through their excellent VPN service. Something like Mulvad. Like Mulvad has their own web browser that's partly based on Firefox and Tor browser. It's very interesting. And you can actually, but even with that, like you can actually bake in an add-on into Firefox that takes advantage of the, privacy and security enhancements that Mulvad puts into their own web browser, right? So, you can take your pick on that. Okay. I mean, if you're concerned, if you're trying to be on that road of more control at the very least, maybe not even so much privacy, but maybe you do care about privacy or whatever. I mean, again, having a great ad blocker is so key to accessing the internet in general and securing, your use of the internet. So yeah, I mean, I still pretty much would say Firefox, Brave, it does interesting things. Okay. And it would probably hover in, with those two. If you're on, Apple's hardware, I think Safari is basically is in many ways the only way to go, because minus outside of Europe, like on an iOS device, you have to use Safari. No matter what web browser you think you're using, you have to use Safari. Okay. So, I still recommend Safari. And again, like I said, really macOS gives you options of doing ad blocking and other security features that kind of exist outside of, say, Manifest v3, just like Brave browser allows for, ad blocking and security features outside of Manifest v3. Like Manifest v3 ultimately doesn't matter when it comes to the Brave browser. Okay. But Firefox is still, is still king as far as a lot of that goes. Okay. And in fact, they just came out with version 136 and now they even have vertical tabs. Fucking right, man. Because when I was using that with Microsoft Edge and when I test Edge, like that's a revelation on a widescreen monitor. Like that's such a wonderful thing, So Firefox is far from tired and old. Like it's still implementing new ideas and refreshing their UI and doing some very interesting things, leading the way in a lot of security features. Seriously. I mean, just look what they're doing with DNS, HTTPS, and so on. I mean, amazing. So, and look, I like Opera. I mean, from like a functionality kind of standpoint and like a design standpoint, it's really cool. I've used Opera for years. But I mean, as far as the conversation goes, if you're one of the people who are reacting to the news about Firefox and you're concerned about privacy, again, depending upon what you're doing, what are you doing? Maybe it's something that requires the Tor browser or where the Tor browser makes the most sense. But then if you're doing everyday browsing, yeah, Brave or Firefox is really, I think, where it's at, as far as those go. I know some people like the Arc browser. I don't know, that's a whole separate conversation. But again, we're focusing more here on, like modicums of privacy and security. Okay. And those are where I would be looking. And overall, do I agree with like supporting? And I've talked about this recently, okay, on real-time sovereigns. Do I agree with supporting, not having a monoculture of web rendering engines? Yeah, of course. Okay. And I think Firefox is really important to that. So on that reason alone, you may want to use Firefox. And that has nothing to do with privacy. It just has to do with having fucking options. But man, I cannot recommend using these small team web browsers. I just can't. Just like I can't recommend small team operating systems. I just can't. Like the risks are just too high. They're too great. So with all of that said, consider always the human condition and always think, okay, what do I actually want to do with this? And then plot accordingly. Because I mean, this is the reality too. Most people, like even if you're a hardcore Firefox user, say on Windows or something, you probably still have to use Edge every once in a while. Or maybe even you have to have Google Chrome installed every once in a while. Why? Because there's some things that just only work with Chrome or just only work with Edge. It's true. No matter how hard you try with Firefox, it's just never going to work because it's part of, some closed source code. And so you still have to use those. So really everybody uses multiple web browsers. Okay. But there's always like that main one. All right. And if Firefox is your main one, again, this supposed fiasco is no fiasco at all. And it is no reason to leave. And I'm going to leave it at that. And I will see all of you, on the other side.